Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Career Connections, Career Personality Assessment. We are excited to have Chris Miller, the WSU Global Campus Career Counselor, back with us today to help us explore our personality traits and how to use those in life, in communication, and in the work field. Well, without any further ado, let's welcome Chris and turn it over to him.
Thank you, Josh. Let's get my thing set up here. There I am. Thanks for that, and thanks for joining today. Today we are focusing on career personality type assessments, and I know there are a lot of very similar types out there. So I'm going to talk about kind of the background for these types of career personality assessments, and what you should keep in mind with your results and how you can use them going forward, and just talk a lot about Myers-Briggs and Carl Jung's theories in general. And so yeah, I'm the career counselor for the Global Campus. Thanks for joining. We talked about what we're doing here. If you have questions during the webinar, go ahead and enter them in that chat box on the lower left-hand side. I will answer them if I can. Sometimes I get going and I miss them, but if I do miss something, I'll come back to it at the end. And then I think it'll take about 35 minutes. I haven't done this specific career assessment type before for a webinar, so that's just kind of a general guess about the timeline. All right. So as some of you know who have attended any of my webinars before, I just like to hit on the career development process in general at first. So we're talking about the Know Yourself section. And for these ones, I wouldn't really necessarily pick any of the ones listed on this image, so values, interests, strengths, traits, ambitions. With career personality assessment, I would say it's not strengths, it's not traits. But those things are definitely an influencing factor on your personality. What you're good at, what you're interested in, what's important to you, what your future goals are, that's all contributing factors to your general personality. So taking a very limited look at personality today in the vein of career development, and I'll talk a little bit about exploring options, but mostly this is all in that first upper right quadrant there. And let's go ahead and get started and talk about the limitations. And if you attended the last webinar or any of the assessment webinars in the past, these are just some kind of general career assessment limitations. So as identified by Dick Bowles, and he's, of course, famous for What Color Is Your Parachute, jobhuntersbible.com is the companion piece for that, companion website. No test can fully measure you. You should let intuition be your guide on taking these assessments. Try not to predetermine how you want them to turn out. You're looking for clues and suggestions, especially with this assessment. And it's important to try out several different assessments. And so like the previous one where you take the ONET Profiler, Interest Profiler, that is a free version of any Holland Code type assessment. So the strong interest inventory would be the more valid assessment for that type of career assessment. And for this one, you took this free Jungian type assessment, but what you would want to do if it's a meaningful exercise for you is take the Myers-Briggs, which is available for WSU students also. Okay, so specific limitations from general to now specific Myers-Briggs type limitations, and I'm not just talking about the assessment that you completed for this. I'm talking about the Myers-Briggs and the Kiersey temperament disorder. Anyone that kind of has those four-letter codes that you'll get that are talking about career, personality, and preferences. So then some of the limitations are this is a general understanding of personality in relation to career development, especially into relation of career preferences, situational preferences, how you process information, how you energize yourself, and things like that. It's not a good assessment of general personality. In the MBTI, I know it doesn't claim to be, and that's one of the interesting critiques of it, is that the reliability and the validity for the MBTI is not solidly supported through research. So essentially what it's claiming to measure, so preferences and career preferences, it doesn't really do a good job of doing that in terms of statistical significance of the research. Also, so that's validity. So with reliability, people aren't necessarily getting the same scores or the same types from time to time in an insignificant amount of time, or taking time out of the equation. So time between taking one test and taking another. So something to keep in mind. It's a very interesting assessment. I think there's a lot of good information with the assessment, but you have to be very careful on how you utilize those results. So something like the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, the MMPI, that test is, hundreds and hundreds of questions. I know it's been shortened since the original one, but there were 600-700 questions, and that one's really rooting out psychopathology. So that one's looking for, it's one of the better assessments of personality, but it's that in the context of finding out what's wrong with people in terms of psycho or abnormal psychology. So where that is clearly wouldn't be relevant for career development, it's a better assessment of personality in general, I would say. Let's see. It's not a useful predictor of job performance, and it measures preference and not abilities, and it shouldn't be used as a predictor of job success. So we're looking for probable links to job families and occupations, kind of based on more of the work environment, and definitely some of the responsibilities of the job, but just to think about, this is a very general way to think of how you could fit into certain situations. So I put Jungian types for these. These were not titles that Carl Jung came up with by any means. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the theoretical framework for these theories, these career personality theories, and personality in general. But there's kind of this wave of Carl Jung first started theorizing these things, and very shortly thereafter, Myers-Briggs, it's actually kind of Briggs-Myers because it's a mother-daughter combo, and I'll talk about that. And then people like David Kiersey later gave these titles to these 16 different types, and there are different titles for the same one depending on the source you find. Excuse me, but these are some of the better ones, I think, or some of the ones that are a little more clear. So with this first part here, I will ask you to enter your four-letter type in the chat box, and I'll kind of share a little bit about what that one is. I will put mine in here first. I'm an INFP most of the time, ENTJ. So INFP, okay, so let's do ENTJ first. ENTJ, this would be more of a Kiersey temperament sorter type, is the field marshal. There's another title which I'll read later. INFP, that's healer. INFJ, the mastermind, and we have two of those. ESFJ, where are you hiding? The provider. So we have, let me scroll back up so I don't miss one. ENTJ, a little bit more information about the specific type. Field marshal, assertive and outspoken. They are driven to lead. Excellent ability to understand difficult organizational problems and create solid solutions. Intelligent and well-informed. They usually excel at public speaking. They value knowledge and competence and usually have little patience with inefficiency or disorganization. INFP, that is me. Most of the time, that's one of those reliability things I was mentioning. It's probably the one I identify most with. Quiet, reflective, idealistic, interested in serving humanity, well-developed value system which they strive to live in accordance with, extremely loyal, adaptable and laid back unless a strongly held value is threatened, usually talented writers, mentally quick and able to see possibilities, interested in understanding and helping people. INFJs, the counselor, quietly forceful, original and sensitive, tend to stick to things until they are done, extremely intuitive about people and concerned for their feelings, well-developed value systems which they strictly adhere to, well-respected for their perseverance in doing the right thing, likely to be individualistic rather than leading or following. And ESFJ, is the provider. Warm-hearted, popular, conscientious, tend to put the needs of others over their own needs, feel strong sense of responsibility and duty, value traditions and security, interested in serving others, need positive reinforcement to feel good about themselves, well-developed sense of space and function. So these are some of the further developed titles and concepts for these types. Neither Carl Jung nor Myers-Briggs, I don't believe either of them were involved in naming titles for these specific 16 types. I think that was further developed by Kiersey and others that did a temperament sorter, which is a very similar assessment with similar results, but temperament and preferences are kind of different. It's kind of a convoluted assessment area because personality is very complex. So, I mean, that's the reason why it's that way, and it can only be that way, really. So that's looking at some of the overall themes. I'll go a little more in depth with some of these later, too. But I just want to share a little bit more information about these first and how the dichotomies work, the scales from one to the other. So we have introverts versus extroverts on the main one, and this was one of the main parts of Carl Jung's theory. Let me pull up my I versus E. So this is probably the most misunderstood parts of the career assessment personalities, is that when people think of introvert or extrovert, they have a very clear sense of what that is. But that's not necessarily what they're trying to measure here. So this scale or dichotomy of introversion to extroversion is how we interact with the world, where we prefer to focus our attention, so internally or externally, and from where we derive our energy. So I know for me personally, some people that know me are surprised to find out that I'm an INFP. That you would assume I'd be an E something. But that's one of those things that on the scale of, how my results come out, sometimes I am a little more E, but I think in general I'm clearly more I. So, and a lot of that is, some people might think you're an extroverted person, but you're deriving your energy more internally. You're focusing your attention internally. So it's hard. Those words are very loaded. So it's important to understand, how they're measuring or what they're trying to measure, and how they're describing what they're measuring. So extroverts, energized by being with people, like being the center of attention, active and think, easy to read, share personal information freely, talk more than listen, communicate with enthusiasm, respond quickly, and prefer breadth to depth. Whereas introverts are energized by time alone, they tend to avoid being the center of attention, think then act, more private, share personal information with few, listen more than talk, keep enthusiasm to themselves, respond after thinking things through, and prefer depth to breadth. So extroverts are usually gregarious, enthusiastic, expressive, and auditory, whereas introverts are intimate, quiet, receptive, contained, and more visual. The next dichotomy, sensors versus intuitors. So this is what we're measuring is how we take in and process information. So sensors trust what is certain and concrete. They like new ideas if they have a practical application. They value realism and common sense, like to use and hone established skills, tend to be specific and literal and give detailed descriptions, present information in a step-by-step manner, are oriented to the present, and intuitors trust inspiration and inference, like new ideas and concepts for their own sake, value imagination and innovation, like to learn new skills, get bored easily after mastery, tend to be general and figurative, which wouldn't be surprising if you knew that I was an INFP, and if you attend some of my webinars. Use metaphors and analogies, present information in a roundabout way, and are oriented toward the future. Sensors are concrete, realistic, pragmatic, experiential, and traditional, whereas intuitors are more imaginative, or they prefer, but have a preference of imaginative, intellectual, theoretical, and original. The next dichotomy is judging versus perceiving, so judgers versus perceivers. I know some of these terms also kind of have some loaded connotations, but you got to really think about what they're trying to measure and not let the actual titles be a hindrance. So So this is how we prefer to live, a structured versus spontaneous way, how we orient ourselves to the external world. So judges are happiest after decisions have been made, have a work ethic, work first, play later, set goals and work toward achieving them on time, prefer knowing what they're getting into, are product-oriented, derive satisfaction from finishing projects, see time as a finite resource and take deadlines very seriously, whereas perceivers are happiest leaving options open, have a play ethic, enjoy now, finish the job later, change goals as new information becomes available, like adapting to new situations, are process-oriented, derive satisfaction from starting projects, see time as a renewable resource, and see deadlines as elastic. So judges are stress avoiders, systematic, scheduled, planful, and methodical. Perceivers are polyactive, casual, spontaneous, open-ended, and emergent. And so polyactive means like they're stress facilitated, they kind of enjoy the pressure, accomplishing much last-minute rush. So they know the deadline's there, but they're not as concerned as a judger would be. Next dichotomy, thinking and feeling, and this is thinkers versus feelers. Actually, judges versus perceivers would be the fourth one, because I believe that would have been the contribution of Myers and Briggs, which I'll talk about in a second. So thinking and feeling, I skipped around there at the bottom. The thinkers step back, apply impersonal analysis to problems. They value logic, justice, fairness, one standard for all. Naturally see flaws and tend to be critical. May be seen as heartless, insensitive, and uncaring. More important to be truthful than tactful. Believe feelings are valid only if they're logical. They're motivated by a desire to achieve and accomplish. Whereas feelers step forward, consider effective actions on others, value empathy and harmony, see the exception to the rule, like to please others and show appreciation, may be seen as over-emotional, weak, and illogical, important to be both truthful and tactful, believe any feeling is valid whether it makes sense or not, and motivated by the desire to be appreciated. So thinkers are critical, tough, questioning, logical, reasonable, whereas feelers are accepting, tender, accommodating, affective, and compassionate. So that's some of the dichotomy there. Now I'll share a little bit more about the background, some of the theoretical underpinnings here of these psychological and typological theories. So let's talk about the MBTI is more known than Carl Jung's theories just because of the timeline. So the MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, constructed by Katharine Cook Briggs and her daughter, Isabel Briggs Myers. And it's kind of interesting that Katharine Cook Briggs originally got interested in it because of her son-in-law to be, the one who went on to marry Isabel Briggs, so Mr. Myers, and how different he was from the rest of their family. And I don't know enough about him, but it's interesting that he was so different from most of the people in their family that it really kind of got her excited about personality and psychology, and started doing research on her own originally, and it was based on Carl Jung's typological theory. And his theory was based on more anecdotal evidence, clinical observation, not really highly researched, validated standards of psychometrics. So that is, again, one of the criticisms of these types of assessments. But that's kind of where it comes from, just his work with people. So Katharine Cook, she began her research into personality in 1917, so almost 100 years ago. And Carl Jung's book was originally published. It was called Psychological Types in 1921 in German. He was German, so in Germany. And then a couple of years later, the English version came out in 1923, and she had already started putting some research into it. And it found that she originally developed her typological theory as people having 4 different temperaments, meditative, spontaneous, executive, and social. And then she reads Carl Jung's, after it was published in English in 1923, Psychological Types, and she sees that the research there is very similar, except his goes way beyond hers. So she realizes she has a lot of work to do, and her daughter starts helping her as she gets old enough, and her daughter eventually takes over completely, and that's why it's Myers-Briggs and not Briggs-Myers. So let's see, she takes over completely. Neither of them were formally educated in the discipline of psychology or psychometrics. So Myers eventually gets together with a bank in Philadelphia, and from there there's a mentor, and then that person opens up their own personnel consulting firm, and it's very successful. And there she learns more about psychometrics, test construction, scoring, validation, and statistical methods to give it at least some more psychometrically supported results from what they're trying to assess, so career personality. So one of the interesting comparisons to what we've done in the past with looking at the Holland codes, and those assessments were kind of based around World War I and World War II, and how to best utilize men either going into military positions or returning from the war. This Myers-Briggs type indicator was created because they wanted to have something to help women who are entering the industrial workforce for the first time, and to identify the sort of wartime job that would be most comfortable and effective. So one of them, it's interesting, John Holland, a man, and then looking at male roles in the military and how to best utilize these men, and this one is for women during the same time as they're taking over these industrial jobs as men are going off to war. So I think that's kind of interesting. The first MBTI handbook was published in 1944, and then the name was actually changed to Myers-Briggs Type Indicator in 1956. And it's revised a few times, and it exists today in the fourth revision. So that's where we are now. And so some of the other theoretical frameworks that I should point out for this is that Jung's typological model regards psychological types as similar to handedness, so a dominant hand and a left hand, right hand, so a dominant hand and a weaker hand. So people are either born with or develop a certain preferred way of perceiving and deciding. But the MBTI sorts some of these differences into 4 dichotomies, which we talked about before, and that none of these types are better or worse than the other, so that's a really important point for anyone to point out. But that at the same time, none is worse or better than the other, but out of the 16 different types, 16 different combinations, that people innately have a preference for one given type. And I think that's true, even with the issues of validity and reliability. As you learn more about the types, I think people generally, maybe they say I'm sometimes a 1 and sometimes a 2, but they generally have more of a preference for one over the other. So this is also in the same way that writing with a left hand is difficult for a right-hander, so using your non-dominant hand. So using an opposite preference can be difficult, but you can become more proficient at it with practice. The same way if you're in some kind of a situation where, if you're more extrovert or introverted in terms of things we talked about, energy and interacting with the world, it's not like it's impossible, it's just some things are preferred over the others. And again, this is a type and not trait, and that's one of the things I talked about with the career development process. So we're not assessing strengths, not assessing abilities. It's just a clarity of preference of situational things. So a person clearly prefers introversion versus extroversion, but not that someone has a strength, not someone strongly prefers or is good at one thing or the other, not that someone is good at thinking. So there's just preferences and clarity of preference. So people are their own best judge, so that's really important for any self-assessment also. So you can read up on the 16 different types. Maybe you don't feel you totally fit into the assessment result that you were given. So you're your own best judge of what type you are. There's no wrong or right type. No type is better than one or the other. And that's some of those underpinnings of those different types. And so looking more in depth now, we had, let's scroll back up, just to provide a little bit more information. Okay. So ENTJ, pull up my trusty MBTI folder. ENTJ. So this title, like I said, might be different. So the executive here. So ENTJs are tough-minded, logical, and critical, energetic, action-oriented, take initiative and get things organized, quick and decisive, articulate and assertive, have definite opinions, are often clever with words and sometimes brusque, are confident, responsible, and hardworking, and get a lot done. In terms of work style, they want their work to be challenging, provide opportunities to develop and advance, like their accomplishments to be visually acknowledged. They like to set and meet objectives, generally follow procedures unless they interfere with accomplishing goals and are frustrated by the lack of action or closure. In groups or on teams, you're very goal-oriented, want to stick to the job and get it done. Could be anxious when things are not getting done and will not let the group flounder. Gregarious but not necessarily warm, maybe uncomfortable with small talk. Often have or assume authority, question authority when they don't have it. During change, will perform well in crisis, able to deal with complexity and handle multiple factors at the same time. During conflict, see conflict as a problem to be solved, a situation to get beyond, or something to negotiate. Not comfortable agreeing to disagree or living with tensions such as personality differences. In terms of contributions, broad vision and the ability to anticipate and plan for long-term organizational challenges. Initiative to move the team or organization in new directions to attempt the seemingly impossible. May be experienced as great at running things and sometimes as imposing ideas on others or making decisions for them. Career and work-oriented and sometimes are seen as being too serious and not fun enough. A little bit more information about ESTJs. I have a lot of information about each type, so if you're looking for more information about your type, just let me know. And I'll have my contact information up at the end also, but I'll put it in right now. Humor66@wc.edu. And then I don't want to go too much into each of the types, so I know there were 2 INFJs, so I'll share some more information about that also. So INFJs, what you might notice first, are warm, cooperative, trusting, sensitive, tactful, and easy to get along with. They have good communication skills, are persuasive, and are good listeners, are dependable and persistent. They do what they agree to do and meet obligations and seem to have their act together. Their work style is to prefer a supportive environment that is friendly and non-competitive and where harmony and praise are common. They see work as a mission or service, want to work to make a difference for others and want to grow through their work. They like variety and opportunities to be creative and dream up new approaches to routine. In groups or on teams, they are imaginative, have or generate ideas, are comfortable with abstraction and complexity, and can synthesize multiple perspectives or diverse information. They prefer to have both organization and structure and concern for people and human values. Want the team to organize itself around vision and values. During change, they may experience tension between being too oriented towards newness and change and honoring traditions and what was proven to be comfortable for people. They may withdraw if their ideas are not accepted or their values are not respected. During conflict, they prize and strive for harmony, take a facilitative approach. They may take and or internalize others' concerns, and under stress they want to be alone. Their contributions, their strong and idealistic belief in people and what they can accomplish and encouragement of others maximizes their abilities and potential. They're visionaries, so they advocate their visions, values, and ideals. And they may be experienced as having strong convictions, inner vision, and lofty goals, and sometimes as being single-minded and inflexible about how things ought to be. Indirect and private, so they may be hard to get to know. They're self-critical, hard on themselves, and can tend to be perfectionistic. So that's just to highlight 2 of the skills there, or 2 of the types a little bit more in depth. And I do have a lot of information about each type if you're interested in it. So some of the strengths, I've talked a lot about, the limitations, and for most of the work I do with students, most of it is in the realm of career exploration and not as much in the vein of team building or communication or inter-organizational work. So for me, I don't work with it as much as I work with other assessments. So generally when I'm working with a student, I would recommend, if they're interested in career exploration solely, that they either just do the strong interest inventory or the strong interest inventory and the MBTI to provide more depth to their results. So with the MBTI alone, I think it's interesting for someone as long as they're not in that place of trying to figure out, the best points for career matches for, their personality. If they're using it, in the vein of career development in general, it's an excellent tool. It's an excellent tool for team building, group dynamics, professional development, marketing, leadership training, coaching, and couples therapy. So for marketing, if you're trying to think about, the ways that you can provide resume content and resume language, it can be a helpful tool in that vein also. It's a great tool for organizational success. I'll show you a sample of the MBTI also here in a second in case you're interested in completing it to get just a better look at what your MBTI type is. So those are just some of the things. I think it is a very useful tool, and sometimes I feel like it sounds like I'm bashing it too much. I'm not. I think it just is misused a lot. And so as long as it's being used in those ways and it's understood and the person who's kind of sharing the results with you understands the preference, the clarity preference, and that it's not, one is better than the other, and that people have these different types, and so the whole point is to find ways to understand others and to better communication. So, tool for organizational success, there's a grad student who recently published, and his name's David Murphy. He's from University of Colorado. He's a counseling graduate student, just published in the National Career Development Association about using it as a tool for organizational success. So one of the interesting things he says is imagine a large organization is asking 4 people from different units who have never worked together to come together and decide a way to improve operations within this organization. So you have one person, and they've never worked together before, and they've been told independently, come up with an idea, and then we'll come together. The 4 of you will come together to discuss your ideas to improve operations. So he has an interesting way of putting out this hypothetical situation where one person's coming at very logical and is saying, here's some proven Six Sigma strategies we can use to improve operations. Another one suggests improved training programs to empower the employees to reach their full potential. Third member offers to establish improved interdepartmental communication lines to foster agreement and prevent misunderstanding. And the 4th one comes to the table and recommends a process, an improvement plan designed by combining 3 different theoretical process improvement plans. So it's just like one of the ways to think about how people, they have these different types, they have different ways of approaching the world. And so they're all working for the same organization, they all are in different departments, they're all coming together. So, while that's an unlikely scenario, as the stakeholders would have more say in which one they actually do to improve operations, it's interesting in the sense that one of the strengths really is in team building and group dynamics. You get these people together, you learn more about different types, and you understand where they're coming from more when you know more about how they interact in the world in generally. So I'm going to show you the MBTI here. I did a web tour last time and it didn't work for everyone, so I'm going to attempt to share my desktop, which also might not work for some people. So bear with me. I'll just do a brief look at the actual MBTI sample of it. So just to give you an idea if it's something you might be interested in doing now that you've had the results from this other Jungian type personality assessment. So Jane Sample again. Jane Sample was the last person for the strong interest inventory. It talks about how it is helpful. And the MBTI is good if you really read through it. It doesn't try to talk about how it's a great assessment of personality in general. It talks about what it's actually good for. Except for choosing a specific job or career, I don't think the report can help you in that way, standalone. But it can help you explore more in the career researching part when you're learning more about work environments, what the responsibilities of the job are, what the duties are, and how your skills might be useful in these given situations. So it talks about, again, what it's good for. It talks this person's dichotomy, ENFP, how they land on the dichotomies. So their type is ENFP, and we've talked about these different types. And then this is where does a better job than the strong interest inventory does, because that one has a personal style scale also. But this one is more valid, I would say, in terms of preferred work tasks, preferred work environment. So for this ENFP, you can see some of those preferred work tasks and environments. So some of the action steps are interesting, because that's where it talks more about the usefulness of the MBTI. So you identify a specific job you're considering. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, if there's... No. So this is, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. There we go. So your type strengths will help you think of all the ways... sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself again. Challenges and strategies. This is where it's helpful. And those are the action steps below that I was looking for. So you may have a hard time focusing amid all the possibilities of suggested strategy. First, group all the possibilities into 3 categories, high, medium, low, and then work to prioritize those in the top group. So for all these suggested challenges for types, because people have preferences one way or another, they'll have a challenge, a strategy, and action steps. So these are the action steps I was talking about. And again, that's more just understanding your type. Scrolling here, scroll to the bottom, I might have to go up here on the standard score. And when they do list job options for the MBTI, it's using a self-selection ratio. So I would say pay more attention to the job families and not the specific job titles listed below. So personal care and service is a general job area where this person suggested would rank high because of their preferences. We don't pay so much attention to lodging manager, personal trainer, hairdresser, child care provider. That's more, I think, important with the occupational themes of the strong interest inventory. So look at those and think about, those work environment. They talk about the strengths and the challenges ahead before this, so think about how those would play a role in each one of these areas. Some of these areas that might be moderately attractive, and least attractive. Oh yeah, so self-selection ratio. So they look at types within certain occupations, and they say, so it's like the proportion of your type in this occupation that enjoys the work that they do, divided by the proportion of that type in the population in general. So that's kind of how they come up with these job lists, is they find those people who like the job, like their work, like what they do, and you have a similar type of them, the similar type as them, compared to the prevalence in the population in general. Okay, career trends. Again, this is how they're coming up with those career listings. That self-selection ratio I mentioned. And I think that takes us to about the end there. So here's the tips, some of those action steps. So for this person, can you use your preferences productively by creating a special role in which you do a certain set of tasks, or by finding a niche for yourself in a particular environment, or with a select group of coworkers you enjoy working with? So think of that for each position that you're researching. Work at understanding or communicating with others whose preferences are different from yours. Find other opportunities, such as in your leisure activities, to express your preferences. So that's just a brief look at the MBTI. Again, that is an option for you if you enjoy these career personality assessments. Jump back over here. So again, for career exploration, I talked about the Occupational Outlook Handbook before. I'm not going to take you on a tour of it today, but that's the website for it, bls.gov/OOH. So in terms of your results, for any kind of career you're researching, you take your strong interest inventory results, and you're looking at some of those specific job matches, potential matches. Think about the work they do. Think about the work environment and some of the similar occupations listed. That's really where your MBTI type results can come into play and be a factor. So these are, again, some of the other career assessment types. We talked about career interest assessment. This is a personality assessment. I think work values is also a very interesting assessment and helpful for those people that don't find those perfect job matches, those dream career ideas, they can find, they can assess what's important to them in any given career and find some different options depending, given those results. So that should take us to the end there. Thank you so much for joining today. If you have more questions about your specific type or you're looking for more information, just let me know, send me an email, and I will provide you with much more information about your specific Myers-Briggs type. And there's some more of my information there, the Career Support website, the Career blog, and I'll hand it over to Josh now. Thanks again. I'll stick around for some questions, and Josh will have more information about some upcoming career events too. So thanks a lot.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I hope that you all learned a little bit more about your personality type and how to apply that with communicating with others and communicating especially with those in the career force with us. I would like to invite you next Thursday. We're having Scott Barlow come back. He's on the second webinar out of his 3-part series of how not to just work but to love your work, and how to discover your strengths and use your anti-strengths, also known as weaknesses, to really get ahead and enjoy what you're doing. So visit our website at connections.wsu.edu to learn more about that. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you.